Hi, welcome to one of my favorite times of the year, my year-end knitting stats in review. I tracked all of the same stats this year as I did last year, so we will do a little compare and analyze of that. To track everything, I created a spreadsheet. It's fairly simple. It just has a lot of pivot tables to automatically calculate all of these stats. And after all of the stats, I'm going to assess my goals. So I will take a look at last year's video, see how I did, give you the status of those goals, and then set some new ones for 2025. I do have the spreadsheet set up to track sewing and spinning. Of course, you can add any craft to it that you want, but I did not really spend the time this year detailing my spinning and my sewing projects. So even though I did do a fair amount of that, I'm just going to be covering my knitting and crochet projects. All right, let's get to it. So my finished objects total is 17, which is 4 more than last year, so that feels like a definite win. I made 9 sweaters. One of my goals for the year was to knit more sweaters than in the previous year, and I more than doubled that, so that is exciting. I also made some socks and some hats. I knit a pretty similar amount of those to last year. The other, it's just one object, was that cat blanket. I also like to track how many projects I have going on at one time each month. And I brought my average down this year from 4.4 last year to 3.5 this year. Looking at both years side by side, there is a definite drop off each year where I finished a lot of projects. So last year that was September, and this year it was July. It wasn't an official goal for me to work on fewer projects at a time, but it was sort of a loose goal. And I think I would like to work on that again this year and try to lower the amount of projects that I'm working on at once. This year I knit a total of 11,849 yards, which is 4,864 more yards than I knit last year. This was a really good knitting year for me. I knit a lot of sweaters, so that had a lot to do with it. This next stat is projects that used stash versus projects that I bought materials for. So in total, 41.2% of my projects used stash, which is a little bit lower than last year at 53.8%, which makes sense to me because I used a lot of my stash last year, so I just had less to work from this year. I also didn't add to my stash very much. Nearly everything that I bought this year, I used it in a project. And I honestly like the size of the yarn stash that I have. I like to have yarn on hand, but I don't have like sweater quantities. So I would be happy with around this percentage next year. This next one is really exciting. It is my average length per whip in days. So this year it was 61 days, which is over half the amount of my average last year at 128 days. When I saw this number at the end of 2023, I knew that I wanted to try to cut it down and really focus on projects from start to finish and not get too distracted by other projects. I don't like having a ton going on at once, and I did really cut it down more than I expected to. About 2 months is how long it takes me to knit a sweater, so I don't expect to get this much lower. This next category is the made for category. So 79% of my projects I made for myself, leaving 21% to be for other people. This ratio makes more sense to me than last year's when I knit quite a few more gifts. So 30% of what I made for others. I mostly knit for myself, so the 80-20 ratio makes sense to me and is not really something that I'm like looking to actively change. Next is patterns modified, so it's just whether or not I modified them. And this year I modified 35.3% of my patterns, which is a little bit lower than last year when I modified over half of the patterns that I knit. I just think it's interesting to see how often I modify patterns, and to me what counts as modified is not something as straightforward as like changing the length, but it's something that is like structural or a design element. Most of the time when I'm modifying patterns, it's to make them fit me better, so I'm essentially customizing them. In the past, I would modify almost everything that I knit. Now I tend to be a little bit more chill about it. But I think that's also because I have learned a lot more about general fit, and I kind of know going into something if I'm going to like the fit versus making whatever is really popular or trendy and then trying to customize it to fit my body shape. For most frequent, there are a few things that kind of stand out to me here. One is that my most frequent material was superwash merino. I don't typically knit with superwash very often. I don't knit with merino very often, but somehow this became my most used yarn. My most used color was purple, which was surprising, but I think purple is in a bit of a resurgence for me. I haven't knit with it or worn it in quite a few years, but growing up for at least a time, it was my favorite color. My first favorite color was always blue. My most frequent designer was a tie between Andrea Mowry and Ysolda Teague because I knit 2 projects from each of them. I knit 2 Musselburgh hats, and then I knit my Traveler hoodie and the Traveler hat. My spending on my crafting this year was very similar to last year, which is interesting because I thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but it was basically the same percentage of my income, which is just under 3%. I mean, I'm happy with that number. I could see myself going up to about 5% and still being happy with my spending as long as I'm using what I'm buying. And I will share the breakdown of my spending. I tracked it a little bit differently this year, and I like the way I did it this year a lot better. So the majority of my spending was on yarn. That is not surprising. I spent 33.5% at local yarn stores, whether it was my own local yarn stores or like LYS's that I went to while I was traveling. The next one down is indie dyed yarn. I spent 24.5%. The next percentage is local fabric stores. I bought quite a bit of fabric this year. I think this was the most sewing that I've ever done, but still not nearly as much yarn as I bought. It just makes up a pretty significant part of the donut because fabric is pretty expensive. Next is Amazon. I spent 11%, always trying to get that lower. Mid-size retailers, 8.9%, and then Ravelry, 4.7%, and all of that is knitting patterns. Something that's interesting is that this year I bought quite a bit less indie dyed yarn. Last year I tracked it as hand-dyed yarn. Despite it being a goal this year to buy more indie dyed yarn. By the way, I just noticed that you can see my cat's shadow right there, and he's currently cleaning himself. So if you were wondering what that was, it's just my cat. So that's everything that I tracked this year. I know it kind of seems like a lot to track all of that for each project, but honestly, it's not too bad, especially with an automated spreadsheet. I generally will go in each quarter and just like add my projects rather than inputting them in every time I finish something. And that seems to be easier for me to just kind of keep a handle on it. The final number that I did write down is how many yards I spun. I do keep track of my spinning projects, but I only recently realized that Ravelry has a feature specifically for hand spun yarn. Before I was just tracking it all in like a separate spinning spreadsheet. But this year, I spun a total of 2,676 yards. Most of that was for my Traveler hoodie. Let's move on to my knitting goals. I have decided, against my better judgment, to rewatch my video from last year and let you know the status of each goal that way. Okay, watching yourself from a year ago in a video is horrifying, but this is how I have chosen to live my life. I'm definitely going to skip to the goal setting. All right, here we go. So the first is to finish Pitch, which is a giant cabled cardigan that I started back in September. I started it, I'll talk about it in my next episode, and then I kind of put it on the back burner for a few months while I worked on other projects. But I would really like to finish that this year. So I don't have any sort of deadline other than finish it in 2024. So that's really the only pressure I'm putting on myself, is I just want to finish it. I don't want it to be like a multi-year languishing project, but I don't have any lofty ideas that I'm going to finish it like this winter. So I just put this year. Okay. Shit. It is definitely a multi-year project at this point. I did not finish Pitch. I mean, I worked on it and I did make an attempt to finish it at the end of this year. If you watch my working on knitting goals video, you can see that, but I definitely have not finished it. I've got a long ways to go. The next one that I have on here is start a sweater for my partner. And again, we're not going for big lofty goals this year, so I just put start a sweater. I don't need to finish it. So I would just like to spend some time thinking about what that sweater is going to be and then get started on it. Right, not going for big lofty goals, just living life on easy mode. This is another one that I didn't really complete, and so I'm kind of marking it as like halfway finished. We did do some planning together to figure out exactly what kind of sweater he wants next, but I did not actually start it, and we're still kind of in that planning phase, so another one I really didn't do. Next one is knit more sweaters than I did in 2023. Definitely did that, knit more than double the amount of sweaters. The next one is knit with linen. Last summer, I started a linen project that I'll probably talk about here soon-ish, but though I love linen as a material, I'm trying to remember what that project is, and I definitely didn't talk about it. I really struggled with working with it, and I need to figure that out before I can move forward with that project. So that's sort of the motivation behind this one. Okay, I definitely did not work on that project. I do still have it, but I didn't touch it. But I did knit with linen, so I did accomplish this goal. My sunshine tee has linen in it. This next one is a bit more open-ended, and it is purchase from small businesses and experiment with different yarn dyers. And I'd also like to be a little bit more, like I said, experimental and less like risk adverse when it comes to hand-dyed yarn. This one I'm marking as complete because I did purchase from a lot of small businesses and more than I did last year. The experimenting with different yarn dyers is maybe up in the air. I wouldn't really say that I did that, but I think the motivation behind this goal, as I said, was to just be less risk adverse when it comes from buying yarn that I think is perfect for a project, and I did do that a couple of times. My Paul Klee stands out to me as one because typically I will buy hand-dyed yarn for like a yoke or for one element of a sweater, and then go for a more budget-friendly yarn for like the main color or the rest of the body. And for that one, I found some Ritual Dyes yarn that was the perfect color for what I was looking for, and I just bought it. Like no other questions asked. I didn't like overanalyze it or overthink it. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at with that goal. So I'm marking that one as accomplished. The next one is knit with hand spun. The idea behind this is that I will spin with a knitting project in mind and then complete that project. Definitely did this. I started with a pair of socks and then I moved on to a sweater. The last one is one that I'm not 100% sure of yet, and that is crochet a garment. I just think it would be fun to try it, especially with all of the really cool crochet garment patterns that are coming out. There's one in particular that I have in mind for this, but we'll see if that pans out. The pattern I had in mind did not end up working out, but I did crochet a garment, my granny square cardigan. There are two other like knitting related goals that I have this year. The first is to organize my needles. I organized my needles. It is a much better system, and I did that in my working on my knitting goals video. And then the other goal is to finish my craft room. So I did not get there this year. I did work on my craft room a lot and I have done quite a few different things to it, but I would not say that it is done. I did buy a sewing table, which you can see right behind me, and then I also bought these IKEA cabinets to hold all of my stuff, and that really went a long way. I definitely have a better time in this space crafting, sewing, but there's still a lot of work to do to make this more functional for me. So here's my track record. I did pretty well. There could be some improvement. We have a few rollover goals. The first is to finish pitch. If I don't finish it this year, it's probably not going to happen. So I'm going to say finish pitch. The next is to knit my boyfriend a sweater. We have been extensively planning and in discussion about what he wants. So that's going to happen this year. And third, finish my craft room. I think I'm going to update the wording on that to just be organize my craft room, because I don't think I'll ever feel like it's finished. But there are a few organizational things that I want to do. All right, new goals for the year. The first is to reduce my average active projects per month. I just want to cut that down a little bit more. I really like to be focused on one project at a time, and having some like background vanilla on the go projects is fine, and I like to have those, but in general I want to stay focused on one big project at a time. The next is to continue making videos and specifically film my projects from start to finish. I love watching these types of videos and I want to make more content like that. And lastly is to style my knits and come up with fits during the project planning stages. I had a lot of fun in 2024 putting together outfits with my sweaters and even accessories, and it just made it a lot more fun. I love putting together an outfit. I love a good theme, so I just want to make that an official goal. I think it will motivate me in the project planning stages, help me choose projects that I actually will want to wear, and also motivate me to finish things because I can see the outcome. I have a vision. Those are my goals. I am lucky enough to have a YouTube channel where I can feel the public shame if I do not accomplish them. The sun is doing a thing, so I think that is my time to end the video. I am really excited for 2025 and all that is to come in my knitting life. Anyway, that's it for me. I have a few exciting things planned soon, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!